afternoon. My name is Josef Weidenholzer. I'm a member of the European Parliament representing Austria, a member of the LIBE Committee. I want to welcome you to this presentation. As most of you know, in the LIBE Committee at the moment we are discussing the data protection package, and I think this is one of the most important pieces of legislation in this period of the Parliament. If we succeed with the regulation, I think this will set global standards in terms of data security. It will also, as I see it, will also improve the trust of citizens in the data protection, which I think is one of the most important parts of competitiveness. So data protection and competitiveness are on the same level. It is important to combine those two aspects. I'm very happy to have special guests here today from Ixquick. Is a little bit of a funny name. We will hear more about this. Ixquick is a search engine, and Ixquick is privacy by design. So the good practice of Ixquick is that they do not store data. So this is an alternative. Ixquick is a private-owned company, and it had been awarded the European Privacy Seal in 2008. So it's quite some time ago, and it still keeps the seal. So it shows that this business model is working. And if we're discussing about data protection, I think this is important to learn about such a model of good practice. Alexander Hanff is sitting up there on the computer. He's a well-known privacy advocate who has worked for several NGOs. He will do the presentation. And to my right hand is Alexander van Eesteren. He is Vice President of Business Development and Media Relations at Ixquick. I'm very happy that so many people are attending the meeting, but I have to inform you that some of you or some of them are leaving us in about 45 minutes, because some of this crowd here is an Austrian group from the College of Education in Linz, and they are here to see how the Parliament works, and they will have at 3 o'clock a meeting with the ambassador in the embassy, so they have no other choice than to leave us, but then we can continue the discussion. So we will have the presentation for the next 30-35 minutes, so that there will be no problem in then leaving the room, and then we have time enough to ask every question. I also want to inform you that the meeting is web streamed, and you can, our visitors can, you have the address here, we have it on
the web page.
On our web page, so everybody who wants to inform other people that they can also join in, please inform them about my web page. So, Alex, the floor is yours. Just press the button. Yeah.
Okay, that's right. Okay, thank you, Joseph. Thank you for inviting us here to talk about Ixquick and how privacy can be used to build business in Europe. I've given many speeches in Brussels and all over the world, in fact, on privacy. as a privacy advocate, most of the time my speeches are quite negative. They're talking about how companies are abusing privacy and how they're abusing the fundamental rights of European citizens. My focus is primarily on digital privacy, specifically behavioural advertising. I've been involved in a number of consultations within the European Union, the European Commission, European Parliament and UK government on privacy and behavioural advertising. So it's something that's very passionate to me. And I've known Ixquick now for about 5 years. 2009, I think we first came across each other when I was working for Privacy International. So to have the opportunity to come here today and talk about privacy in a positive light is something that I couldn't really pass up on. Now, I'm fully aware that lobbying in Brussels has increased massively over the last 18 months with the lead up to the draft data protection regulation, which is currently making its way through the European Parliament. The Libby vote is due, I believe, in the middle of June now. So this is a critical time for the European Parliament to inform themselves about alternatives which counteract some of the lobbying which we're hearing from the US. And it's interesting for me because 2 years ago I was in China, in Beijing, and I was taking part in the European-China Human Rights Seminars, which happen twice a year. I've given speeches at a couple of them based on privacy. And as you can probably imagine, speaking in Beijing about human rights is a particularly difficult thing to do and can be a little bit scary even for an advocate. So we were briefed very clearly by the European Commission on the types of things we could talk about when we were there. And I needed to find a way to address privacy issues without offending the host, which was the Chinese Foreign Affairs Office. And it seemed to me at the time that the most effective way to do that would be to look at some of the issues we face in Europe and some of the privacy concerns we have here, and to try and make the Chinese officials aware of the type of activities which they would likely see in the future as a developing nation. And I talked about the issue of lobbying and how in Europe we're seeing more and more lobbying, and in the US, of course, lobbying is endemic within the system. It's been there for a long, long time. And we're seeing a situation where corporations are now almost writing the laws. And we see that more specifically here in Europe recently with the previous vote on the draft data protection regulation. Lobby Plag, a European organisation, set up, and they've been carefully noting the lobby documents, clauses, which are being added to the regulation. And we're seeing a situation where US companies are literally writing our laws. And we're seeing these changes appear in the draft regulation. And this is exactly the sort of thing I was warning China about 2 years ago. And the interesting thing was, most of us wouldn't think of China as a privacy or human rights conscious country. But after I gave my speech, I had a standing ovation. And the only criticism came from a European industry group member who basically said that there was no lobbying situation to worry about in Europe. And immediately a member of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs stood up and defended me and said, we're seeing exactly the same thing now in China. The increase that we've seen over the past 2 years on the lobbying front from European and American companies who seek to monetize the personal data of people within China. This is an emerging market within China. So it was really interesting for me to see both the European critics standing up and basically accusing me of lying in my speech, and then being defended by the most unusual and most unexpected person in the audience to stand up and defend me. So really the reason why I'm talking about China is 2 years ago we were talking about this issue, before we got to the stage where we are now with this draft regulation. And we've seen lobbying increase and increase and increase within Europe and within the US. In fact, just last week, a bill in California for the right to be forgotten has been suspended for another year as a result of the increased pressure from lobbyists in Silicon Valley. We need to be really vigilant within Europe to make sure that we don't tiptoe around the issues of privacy, and we don't try and make US companies happy by weakening the existing regulation because certainly some of the stuff I've seen as an activist with regards to the types of things that the US lobby is saying in Brussels at the moment would actually weaken the existing directive, as well as weaken the prospective draft regulation. So we have to make sure that we really don't weaken these regulations. And the reason why we have to do that is because European MPs, European Parliament MPs, are here to serve and represent citizens of Europe. They're not here to serve and represent the interests of US corporations. They're here to protect the fundamental rights and represent European citizens, but also to protect European business. The world is in economic crisis at the moment. We see a company here, Ixquick, who really are showing phenomenal growth, showing amazing success. And they're doing this based on embracing existing regulations within Europe, enhancing those regulations, really going above what's required by law, setting the bar so high and building a relationship of trust with their users and seeing growth year on year, which is phenomenal level of growth, double the growth that we're seeing in other sectors. We're seeing a company who went from 344 million searches 2 years ago to over 700 million searches last year. It's phenomenal growth. And if we start to weaken the regulations, we're going to weaken the chance of these companies to exist and compete at this level in Europe. And these companies are based in Europe. The profits aren't being siphoned out of Europe. They're a European company. So we need the European regulations to protect European citizens' fundamental rights and to protect the businesses within Europe to compete. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Ixquick. Now, as I said, I've known Ixquick since 2009. They've always been very respectful to me as a privacy advocate. They've come to me on a number of occasions to talk about problems that they faced or to get advice on various issues, various aspects of privacy that they can implement into their services. They've always received that advice very well, very respectfully, and every single time, without fail, they've acted on that advice. And for an advocate, that's an incredibly unusual thing to see. We have companies come to us all the time, paying lip service to privacy and trying to make themselves look good by having somebody say something about them who works in privacy as an advocate. And it's often very difficult for us to do that because we know there's an ulterior motive there. We know that they're really not that interested. They're just trying to sanitize themselves, make themselves look better in the eyes of the public. So when you come across a company who really do take the words that you give them to heart and make affirmative changes within their business structure to make those ideas come to reality and fruition, is something that's incredibly rare. And I can honestly say that in the 5 years or 4 years I've known Ixquick and the people there, every single thing I've talked to them about, they've implemented at some point. But furthermore, they're reinvesting in privacy. As Josef said, they were the first company to receive the European certification. They've renewed it every 2 years, so they're re-promising to the public every time they do this that their privacy is important. But not only that, they're working on new products and new services and reinvesting the profits they make from their existing services to bring even more privacy aware and more privacy enhancing products to market. And I'll talk about them a little bit later on. But first of all, I want to talk about Ixquick and what they do now and the current products and markets. Now, as has been said, they were the first company to receive the coveted European certification. In order to do that, they had to undergo strenuous audits. It was a very long process, around 7 months the first time. And it wasn't cheap. They were the first company to do it, so they pretty much set the bar. Why did they receive this? They received this because they do a number of things that other companies, other search engines don't do. When I first started talking to Ixquick, they had the option of encrypting connections using the HTTPS protocol. It was an optional thing at the time. I asked them if they could make it the default, and within a couple of weeks, they'd made it the default. As you can see from the slide there, when you go to Ixquick or Start Page, you automatically go via an encrypted connection. This means that any website that you go to after that isn't able to see your search terms. And it also means that if there's anybody or organization in between you and Ixquick, they can't see what you're asking Ixquick. The data is encrypted, the data stream is encrypted. So you can't have what we call a man-in-the-middle attack or something along those lines. Also, no cookies. Now, I'm known as something of a cookie monster here in Brussels. I've been very active on the issue of 5.3 of the e-privacy directive and the changes which were implemented back in 2011. I'm very well known for having walked out of various meetings, which in my opinion were too industry friendly. And I've been very critical of the way the changes to the directive have been implemented across member states since then. Ixquick came to me again back in 2009 talking to me about cookies. They decided to come up with a new process which would allow their users to still have different settings. For example, Ixquick have a number of languages that the search engine is available in. They have different color schemes, different layouts, different types of ways that you can receive the results. And they wanted to do this in a way which didn't involve cookies. Not because they had to, because certainly under the regulation or under the directive, their use of cookies for preferences would fall under the directive as an exemption. But they wanted to prove, as a proof of concept, that cookies aren't required, that you can do these things without using cookies. To counter some of the lobbying that we were seeing from people like the IAB and the DAA at the time, the advertising industry bodies. So they went through and they looked at all the different preferences and all the different permutations of those preferences, and they developed a unique code which represented every single one. So every possible combination of preferences that you have on Ixquick is represented by its own unique code. Now, some people might be worried that unique code could be used to identify a person. In normal circumstances, this would be true. But because these aren't based on the person, they're based on the preferences, the unique code can't be used to identify any individual. It's only used to identify the preferences. So you might have 10,000 people using the same preference code. You can't identify who those people are, you just know that they're all using those preference codes. But because, again, Ixquick don't log anything, they don't even know that. So they prove that you don't need to use cookies in order to give people choice, in order to make web pages interactive. That you don't break the web if you remove the use of cookies. And one of the things we hear from the advertising industry all the time is, if you remove cookies, you're going to break the web. And the summer of 2010, Europe was alive with people from the IAB, lobbying members of the European Parliament, lobbying commissioners from the European Commission, lobbying the Council of Europe, telling them that if we implement these cookie regulations, we're going to break the internet. Simply isn't the case. Ixquick proved that. You can have user interaction and user settings without the use of cookies. And they do it very, very well. As I said, Ixquick is a European company. If you look at the list of languages that they represent, most of those languages are European languages. They work very hard to ensure that the languages options are available, and they're increasing the number of languages as often as they can. So again, we're looking at a European company providing European services in a language that Europeans can understand. We don't have all the European languages yet, but it's a steady progress that's being made. Now, Ixquick like to keep people's information private, and this doesn't just stop at the web page. This isn't just a case that Ixquick don't log your results, they don't log your IP address, they don't log any other details about you, there's no server-side fingerprinting, they know nothing about you. But they extend that to beyond their own website. They give all their users the option of using a proxy. So when you click on a search result from Google, for example, or from Yahoo, or from Microsoft Bing, when you click on that result, you go to another website. The search engine that you're using has no control over the data that website is collecting. And when you go to that website, they can drop cookies on your system, they can fingerprint you. The way Ixquick try to protect their users even further is by offering this proxy. So if you click on the proxy link, which you can see circled in red, it might not be so clear on the image, then Ixquick will then contact that web server, pull the information down, and present it to the end user. The end user never goes to that website. So that website never knows any information about the end user. They can't drop cookies, they can't collect any information about them. Furthermore, Ixquick strip out code which may be harmful, JavaScript code which may be used to do harmful things to your system. So they offer added security as well as added privacy. This is something which is unique as far as I'm aware, and it really does serve to enhance the privacy and the security of their users, even beyond the Ixquick portal, the Ixquick search engine. The growth of Ixquick, as you can see from this chart, is very impressive. They started off in 2004, and they were seeing around the 50 million requests per day mark. Things started to level out, and then in 2009, after they become more established, we started to see some interesting growth. And you can see from the figures there that the growth has almost doubled year on year. With the growth last year in 2012 was spectacular, absolutely spectacular. And this year currently they're seeing almost 3 million web searches per day. So we're looking at possibly breaking the 1 billion web searches this year, which is, again, phenomenal. And shows that there's a real place in the market for this type of service, that people are aware that privacy is important and they do want to be able to search in private. And more people are using Ixquick. Now, as I said before, not only are they enhancing privacy with their current services, they're working and engineering on new services. For the last 3 years, they've been working incredibly hard on a new email service. Now, email is a very serious issue when it comes to privacy. There are a number of services out there already which provide webmail services. They use these services as a way of raising revenues by advertising, by scanning your emails, seeing what's in there, and serving you adverts based on the context of those emails. And this is a privacy risk. But even beyond that, there's the risk of privacy from governments. Even in Europe, we have the Data Retention Directive, which requires internet service providers, if you're using them for email, it requires them to provide certain data to their government under the directive. Ixquick, with their Start Mail product, which will hopefully be launching this year, and will be going into closed beta in June, because they're a third-party webmail service under the law where they're based, which is the Netherlands, they're not required to provide that data under the Data Retention Directive. So, privacy on email, obviously we talk to our friends and family, we talk about many sensitive issues in email, we use it as a direct communication tool, and it's critically important that we protect the privacy of our emails, particularly with regards to sensitive issues, political issues, sexuality, and all these other things that we may talk about. Ixquick's Start Mail product is really unique with regards to other email services that are currently available in the market. They take a unique approach to security with encryption. They take a unique approach to spam with some really interesting techniques for dealing with spam. And they've invested considerably in the engineering process behind it all. And again, they will be seeking European certification for their Start Mail product. So not only are they showing phenomenal growth on their search, they're reinvesting, they're bringing more privacy-based products to European citizens and to the rest of the world. And this is another reason why we really need to protect them, and we need to make sure that they're able to compete and that the bar isn't changed by this new regulation. So MEPs at the moment have a real opportunity to protect European citizens and European businesses. It's been a long time since the last directive, 1995. We're looking at 18 years since the last directive was put in place, the Data Protection Directive. We really can't waste this opportunity to enhance and strengthen those fundamental rights off the back of the Lisbon Treaty. We really need to make sure that in this evolving information society and digital economy, where information is key and control of that information is really control of the people, we need to make sure that that control is given back to citizens. And it's critically important that the current situation, the draft data protection regulation, that we take into account the fact that the US are not Europe. US companies and US interests are not necessarily the interests of European citizens. And it's critical that MEPs protect the rights of European citizens and protect the rights of European companies. We're not just looking at commercial issues then, with regards to privacy and security. We currently have a situation with safe harbour situations with the US, for example, who have some particularly intrusive legislation known as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Amendments Act from 2008, which renders any concept of data protection in European borders really void. The concentration, the changes to the regulation in 2008 to focus more on cloud computing, it's really a situation where we need to enhance the European environment and industry and become the center of cloud computing and information rights and data processing, to move away from regimes where they feel they have the right to look at all communications and all data that individuals send to each other. In the US last week, there was an FBI interview with CNN where it was disclosed that the American government keep a copy of all communications sent within the US. Clearly something which isn't compatible with European law, and something that we have to make sure we take to task. But not only when we're looking at privacy, we also have to look at the European economy. Most of the data processing businesses within the world are based in the US. The Facebooks, the Microsofts, the Yahoos, the Foursquares, etc. All these big companies, the Amazons, based in the US, making money from European data, but with very little privacy protections in reality. Here in Europe, we have a chance to boost the European economy, to grow the industry here, for other regions of the world to move to Europe, to look to Europe for privacy protection of their data, for the protection of their citizens' data, to ensure their citizens that if their data is based in Europe, that data is safe. We have an opportunity here to really boost the European economy, to really become a central hub of information processing in an ethical and privacy-enhancing manner. We also need to be aware of the fact that the economy is struggling, and we hear from lobbyists all over the world that if we add more stringent privacy regulations, if we enhance the fundamental rights of European citizens, then it's going to destroy the digital economy. I've heard it countless times at countless meetings and countless conferences, people like the IAB and the Digital Advertising Alliance and so on and so forth, all saying that if we enhance privacy, we're going to destroy the digital economy. But as I said before, this money is being siphoned out of Europe. There are a number of investigations, very controversial situations in a number of European states at the moment, looking at tax avoidance schemes of big American companies. They're making this money from European citizens, and they're finding ways to siphon the money out of Europe to avoid paying European taxes. When we have European companies based in Europe, working within Europe, developing the European industry, we provide and boost the European economy. The completely opposite situation. Why should we pander to US companies who are taking that money back out of the EU? It's time for Europe to tell the US, no. It's as simple as that. We have our fundamental rights. Those rights were put in place after consultation over many, many years, decades in fact, and were deemed to be how we wanted to build our European society. We shouldn't change. We shouldn't bend to European will, to US will, just because they say that their economy depends on it. Now is the time for MEPs within Europe to say no, to look at companies like Ixquick, to look at the benefits they're providing to European citizens, to look at the input they're putting into the European economy, and say we will grow as a European industry based on privacy and enhancing the rights of European citizens. Now is the time to do it. We have the Libby vote coming up in the middle of June. It's a critical time when MEPs, when the staff of MEPs are talking to their MEPs regarding the upcoming changes to the European data protection regulation. Remember Ixquick. Remember that they're an incredibly good company, ethical company. They have outstanding growth, they're profitable, and they're doing this all by embracing privacy. privacy isn't going to ruin the European economy. Privacy enhances the fundamental rights of citizens and can be a real boost for European companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Those are Alex. You want to add? On the other hand, I think some of you have to leave us very shortly, so we make this move now, then we can concentrate on. Yeah.
One additional thought. Why is privacy so important when you use a search engine? Imagine that, think about what you fill into the little screen on your computer. It's really sharing your thoughts with your computer. If you aggregate all the information for a year or 2 years or even longer, you get a profile which tells everything about you. And once that information is combined with an IP address, it actually explains everything about you, about your hobbies, about your work, about everything what's in your mind almost. And that's the reason privacy and search engines is such an important combination. I just wanted to add that to Alex's story. Is it time for questions? Or
before you ask for questions, I want to thank you both. You were active in answering questions, and before that I want to welcome my colleague Evelyn Bredner. She is also a member of this SAD group and member of URI committee and people committee, which is also a special interest in data protection. Welcome, Evelyn. Ready for questions? Yeah.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I have a couple of questions. First of all, how is your relation, your contact, for example, with Google? So somehow how they are reacting on you. I'd be quite interested if they are just more or less trying to ignore you, not to say too much, or if they are rather aggressive. Next question is a quite practical one. I just put Ixquick right now in my iBook, and I just wanted to put it as my standard search machine. And when you just do that, they're just offering 3 options, and so somehow it's not offered yet. So my question is how you're cooperating with enterprises in order to make it as simple as possible in order to make you as the standard search machine. My third question is referring to simply data protection of workers. So somehow I'm dealing a lot with these questions right now with the whole data protection directive and regulation in this case we are dealing with. Have you been already dealing with these topics as well? Is there somehow something that touches your field of activity? So somehow I couldn't extract anything that really would directly touch data protection of workers, as just somehow one of the conclusions, it's good not to be more or less seen during the daily work life, so somehow it's an ad. But I would simply like to focus a little bit on that topic as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. Shall we collect some more questions, or do you want to join in?
Yeah.
Now? Yeah?
Yeah.
I'll give Alex the first 2,
Okay.
and this Alex will take the last one.
That's good. Okay.
Alex the young or whatever that is.
Yeah, right.
Alex the dark and
to make it easy. Right.
Alex the dark,
Yeah, well, to start with your first question, how is Google see you? How does Google see you? Actually, we're in 2 search engines. One is Ixquick, as you've seen. That's a meta search engine, so we aggregate up to 12 search engines into one result page. Google is not used for that, so that's just really independent from Google. On the other hand, we run startpage.com, and startpage.com offers Google results. By the way, on both search engines we display AdWords sponsored results to monetize, because we, of course, you know, we have to live, our service needs to be paid. Very often people who are interested in privacy ask us, where's your money coming from? Because nobody can fund, you know, the world, so to speak. Startpage is using Google results. We have an official agreement with Google for doing that, of course, because otherwise you would do something illegal. Yeah, we are, I think we are seen, you know, as a revenue for Google as well. And we are partnering on a very grown-up way. So the relationship is very good, and I think it's always good to have an alternative. If you dominate a market, you really have a problem when you're the only one. And we are, you know, a privacy alternative. We are a small player still when you compare it to Google, of course. Google will always be there, and it's in both of our interests, you know, to keep each other in line. I think it's seen like that. A very important aspect of having a relationship with Google is that we never share any user information with any third party, and that is stated in our privacy policy. That means that when a user uses Ixquick or Startpage, it's all the same privacy. The privacy is secured. We will never share an IP address with any third party, so we don't even do that with Google. We have built some technology behind it to avoid doing that, and that has been agreed. So for the user's perspective, that is a very important aspect of that. Yeah, your second question, how can you make Ixquick the standard in, for example, browsers or any other application on the internet? This is very much a matter of money, of revenue, and of course, you know, when you find search engine alternatives in a browser or in any other application, there's very much a financial relationship behind the scenes which forces that, or which actually defines that. That counts for us as well. Of course, when you do go directly to Yahoo or Microsoft or Google, you know, you can probably earn more money than doing it with us, because we won't do any target advertising and those kind of things. We don't build user profiles. And we've thought about it in the past, of course. We might make much more money by just offering no privacy, because then we can build user profiles and then we can join the others. But our business model is different. We believe in privacy. Every member of our team is really focused and see it as a mission, a personal mission to make the world better regarding the online privacy. Yeah, that is something which is difficult for us, you know, to become a standard search engine in a application. But if you go to our website, you find on the homepage that you can install, or you can add actually Ixquick or Startpage to the browser.
It's a bit complicated to do them. Yeah?
It is not complicated.
We just managed.
Okay, good. Well, you might always ask.
Okay.
You might always ask us if you have questions. We answer every email still, so we are capable of doing that, which is a big help for a lot of users, I think. So if you have difficulties with that, we made it as easy as possible, but I invite everybody, you know, to ask us if they have problems with that.
The workers with the flag are
Yeah.
answer.
With regards to workers' data protection, obviously Ixquick and Startpage log nothing, so there's no concerns over the protection of the data, because there is no data to protect. There is no logging, there's no user information. But more importantly, with the launch of Start now, which I mentioned in the presentation, there'll be a real opportunity for businesses to embrace privacy and to increase their own security using the services of StartMail when they become available. The product that they've developed there is just completely unique. As a privacy advocate, I've never seen another email engine that works the way that Ixquick have managed to develop StartMail. They've invested a great deal of time and resources and engineering resources into developing the product. They've put off launching too early because they weren't happy with the product. They haven't just invested in engineering the product, they invested in the information that comes with the product to educate the users and make the product more useful, more user-friendly for them, more comprehensive. So data protection there obviously is an issue because data is stored. Email servers store emails and they store information about the users who have accounts there. And as I said in the presentation, they'll be going for exactly the same Europre certification on the StartMail service as they have done on the search engine service. So from a worker's data protection and just regular citizens' data protection perspective, StartMail will really provide a very enhanced product that currently doesn't exist anywhere in the world as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Next question. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Stigma. I'm the assistant of the statement. As you can see, our office is really concerned about privacy. I just have a short question, not going too much into detail, but as we start talking about the home pages and starting pages, I now have as my homepage duckduckgo.com, and why should I actually change to Ixquick? What are the differences, and why is Ixquick better than duckduckgo?
So you want to answer?
From my perspective, I looked at DuckDuckGo a couple of years ago when they launched. I had some issues with the service. They were using cookies. They were trying to store flash local storage objects on my machine as well. I don't know if they still do. That was enough to put me off using them. But there's room for many different organisations in this industry. And if you want to use DuckDuckGo, then use DuckDuckGo. If you want to use Ixquick, then use Ixquick. As a privacy advocate, I endorse privacy enhancing technologies. I'm looking to see a market evolve where users benefit from companies that embrace privacy. I know the Ixquick team very well. I've known them, as I said, for the last 4 or 5 years. They've always acted on the advice that I've given them. They've always been very respectful. They've always implemented changes, and they've always been very forward with me and very honest with me. I've had a number of meetings with them over the years. I've watched their products develop. I know the people that work within the organisation, and I trust them. I don't know the people in DuckDuckGo. When I emailed DuckDuckGo, they didn't respond to me. So you can make a decision based on that. I would go for Ixquick because I know them and I trust them. And that's what's important when you're using privacy enhancing technologies. That trust relationship is key. Without that trust, you really don't know what's happening.
May I add something to that? The comparison between, for example, Startpage.com, which displays the Google results with the Ixquick privacy, that combination, I would just try that and see the results from one search engine to the other. It's a choice. Some people say I like this, some people say I like that. It's a free choice, and it must be a free choice because that's the best. When we would be the only privacy search engine, that wouldn't be good for us either, I believe. Second, I think the Europre certification is a very important aspect. Europre is put in place by the European Commission back in 2007, 2008, and it has been funded by the European Commission, and it's run now by German privacy watchdog, the UAB, Till White, as you probably know. And it is a very comprehensive and serious audit a company goes through. Alex was talking about trust. Well, this is something we can prove that we really do what we say we do. And there have been other examples in the internet of companies who said, we offer privacy, and buy all kinds of technologies, but it's very, very important to audit what's happening behind the scenes. because we have seen several examples of companies who said we have the solution, you're not tracked, you're not, etc., etc., and suddenly it seemed that there was a weak point in the chain. So Europees make sure that people really can trust us. And I think that's another important aspect. You ask why should I use one or the other? Europees is a differentiator, I believe. And it's not easy to go through that process.
Who else wants to ask? Yes, please.
Yes, we're starting a social media website, and I'm the co-founder, but I'm not the developer. What I don't understand from the developing side is how do I educate myself, or how do I tell my developers to make sure that they build a site that is privacy pro, because I didn't know that you can't use cookies, or there's possibility of building a site that doesn't use cookies, for example, because people outside are not educated in these matters, and when a developer comes and says, I've got to do that, obviously we go with that. So how can I, as kind of a co-founder that is not technical, be able to educate myself so I can tell my developer what to do or move from that angle?
Yeah, that's where actually it starts, with development. Because there are many websites who think they are secure, and in the end it seems it's proven that it's not. And it's all about development. And I'm not a developer either, but it is a very complicated aspect. For example, for StartMail, one of the reasons it took so long to develop is the privacy and security side. So every rule of code is audited by a security expert. That's a different company who's looking at the code itself, and then another audit is being done to make sure that we never go 100%, but really protect the information we keep in our system. Because with our search engines, we didn't store any user data. That was complex but doable, right? Now we develop StartMail, and now we need to maintain inboxes of people, and that's a different ballgame. So it's very, very important from the development side to educate the developers if they're not educated yet. And for example, we use independent company for that, and that company consists of ex-hackers, the real experts in how can you breach a site or a website or a service or whatever. And those companies offer very often services as well to educate your developers, for example, on what are good privacy practices and how can you implement in your company privacy at design, privacy by design. And so I can bring you in contact with them, but I'm sure there are many other companies who can do that in your country as well. But it's definitely something which is new, because most developers, are not really educated on this, because it's really a different side of life almost. And it's a very good combination, develop and then the privacy by design aspect. That adds a lot, but it's complex, and you really need to be educated by, for example, like hackers or people like that.
It's an interesting point, and one of the questions and one of the issues that I come across very frequently as a privacy advocate is the mindset of developers. And the mindset of developers traditionally is to collect as much data as possible. Even if you have no use for this data today, you probably will in the future, is the mindset of developers. And I know, for example, that Robert Beans, the CEO of Ixquick, asked the same question several years ago. About 2006 was it? What data do we retain? And they found out they had huge amounts of data. And when Robert said, well, what do we use this for? The answer was nothing. And it was at that point that Ixquick decided, well, if we don't use this data, why are we storing it? Why are we collecting it? We're just not going to bother anymore. It's a resource overhead. It costs us money to store. We get no value out of it. And it's a privacy risk. So it's really a case of changing the mindset of the developers. And it's interesting from my perspective because a couple of years ago there was a mobile developers conference in the UK, and they were looking for speakers. And I got in touch with the organisers of the event and said, I work for Privacy International, I'd love to talk to you developers about privacy. And the response was, oh, we're not interested in privacy. And we currently have a mobile market, a mobile application market, which is a privacy nightmare. And why? Because the developers aren't interested in looking at privacy. They're interested in seeing how they can make money from the apps that they make, how they can compete with other apps within that market. Privacy by design isn't something you can tag on after the fact. Privacy by design is as it's defined. You have to do it from the very beginning. You need to talk to people like me, advocates. You need to talk to other companies who are doing things such as Ixquick with privacy. You need to talk to security experts. And at the very foundations of the business or the organisation or the project, you need to implement these privacy features from the start. And this is technology. Most things are programmatically possible. Yeah? Most people would say that you could never have an interactive website that allows users to store settings on how that website, how they interact with that website without use of cookies. Not because it wasn't possible, because it is, as we've shown with Ixquick, but because nobody had ever done it before. Everybody always used the convenience of cookies. There's this mindset of not reinventing the wheel. Well, I'm sorry, but the wheel needs to be reinvented over and over again, because otherwise we have no progress. And we end up with the situation that we have currently, where privacy within the application market is really an afterthought and really needs to be addressed. So if you have to redesign the wheel, and you have to make it perform better, then redesign the wheel. But do it from the ground up. Don't try and add it on after the fact, because you'll find it far more difficult to do so.
Thank you. Other questions?
Perhaps I may add one aspect to it. Awareness is another angle of looking at it. You can say, okay, like you said, you know, and developers are not generally not interested in developing and considering the privacy aspect in this, but you also could say, is the audience, are the users actually demanding for that? And I think, you know, when you explain it, you create awareness, and then a lot of people will ask, yes, I'm interested in privacy. When I can choose between a company who offers the same product, but with privacy in their mind, and the other one doesn't, you know, then many users will choose for the privacy alternative. So awareness and creating awareness is also a very, very important aspect of actually what you're doing from the parliament and decisions with what are being taken, legislation and those kind of things. The awareness of the public is another aspect where it can start. So if there's a demand, there will be more companies who take privacy as the leading direction within their development.
Yes, please.
Is it possible? I'm working on a website, and I would like afterwards to talk to you, so that Google cannot, I would say, store the data, and only Ixquick. It's about potentially millions of pages. I'm working on a site, it's online with hundreds of thousands of pages of each municipality. We're working in 7 countries. Each municipality has 500 pages. Streets, neighborhoods, and all a standard system with table files, with presentation files, and so on. We're putting, and we would like, I've been studying Ixquick, and I'm looking for, or had in mind to contact Google. But then I got an invitation to come here and discover Ixquick with the philosophy that I also want to apply. And my question is, afterwards I'll show you the data and the model. But the question is, which might be of interest, if a website wants to be stored, I don't know the name, cached by Google or another, is it possible that we build in our pages? I'm not an informatician, that only Ixquick is be able to cache and to display, so that people who want to search on our website have to go to Ixquick, which in exchange we would provide a part of the income, a fixed income, potentially all municipalities of the world.
Yeah,
Question for afterwards.
yeah, it's a question for afterwards. Just to just one aspect. It's difficult to no. Let's say differently. For example, we offer a proxy. That's what you could do as well. Right?
I don't know.
A proxy means that our IP address is used to go to another site. So regardless of a search engine which is in between. And that means that the proxy only knows who the user is, or the end user is. But okay, let's discuss this afterwards, but there are, I don't know if that's possible in your application.
It could be mean to have more income for Ixquick.
Yeah, that might be, I don't know, that's yeah.
It's good if there are questions for afterwards, because some sandwiches are provided, but before we come to that point, I want to ask if there are not other people who want to raise questions. I want to ask our two guests what you think is the most important part of the data protection package. So are there red lines for you where you think this could even endanger your activities, or where are the positive sides of the data protection package? So for us as parliamentarians, I think it would be quite important to know also the direct effect on your activities.
I think the awareness of the public is a very important aspect. Very often when I talk about with people about what I'm doing, they are surprised and then they say, well, that sounds interesting, but I always need 5 minutes to explain what we're doing with privacy. And afterwards, after those 5 minutes, those people, for example, on birthdays or whatever, then they say, well, that's what I want as well. But I needed that 5 minutes, so then I created awareness, and everybody agrees with me that privacy is a very important, online privacy is a very important aspect. And that is one aspect. I think if we can manage that, the awareness gets more well known as regarding this privacy aspect. That would help, I think. And perhaps you have another aspect which you feel is important.
From my perspective, the draft data protection regulation is quite strong. As a privacy advocate, I would prefer it was a little stronger, specifically with regards to safe harbour. I have huge concerns with the US and FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and the Patriot Act. I feel personally that the situation with allowing the US as a safe harbour for European citizens' data is a mockery of data protection. I don't think there can be any justification for allowing a country who basically allow themselves to spy on European citizens wholesale without so much as even transparency of the process. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court is a secret court. There's very little information about the warrants which are issued. The only thing we know is that the number of warrants which are denied are normally in the single figures each year out of many hundreds which are applied for. And this isn't acceptable as a privacy advocate. We also see Microsoft and other large corporations who are becoming more transparent with the requests they're receiving from governments for data about their customers or their users, which is again a concern. And when we look at the amendments to FISA which took place in 2008, we can see that the types of data and the types of people that data is being sought on has been expanded as well. So we're not talking about terrorists. we're talking about political activists, we're talking about human rights activists, journalists. All these people are within the scope of people of interest under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And there was a report commissioned by the European Commission back in January, I believe it was, co-authored by a good friend of mine and an expert in the field, Casper Bowden, looking at the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act amendments in 2008 and emphasising the dangers and the risk that this presents to European citizens' data. And I'd really like to see the European Parliament take a stronger stance and not to yield so willingly to US authorities for the purpose of diplomacy. I think we have strong regulations within Europe for a reason, and there's an expectation from European citizens that those regulations will remain and be enhanced, particularly by the draft regulation. So I would like to see stronger clauses within the regulation with regards to access to European citizens' data and safe harbour rules. But more importantly here, today, the thing that faces us at the moment is this overwhelming pressure of lobbyists in Brussels from Europe. The amount of money and the budgets being used to try and influence the decisions of European officials and parliamentarians and commission members is staggering. And when we see information presented by organisations like LobbyPlag, which show cut and pasting of lobby document clauses directly into prospective legislation or regulations within Europe, that's wholly unacceptable. That really isn't democracy. You know, that's corpocracy. We can't allow that to happen. We cannot allow people who are voted to represent the citizens of Europe to be bent to the will of corporations for the purpose of profit. You can never put privacy before profit. Privacy is a fundamental right. It comes out of a very difficult time within Europe. The first issues with regards to human rights and privacy were born out of the Second World War. Some people in this room may have relatives who were directly impacted by some of the things that happened during that stage of history. And it's incredibly sensitive. I remember I gave my first speech in 2008 in London at a Privacy International event before I joined Privacy International, and there was an aged gentleman there who was a veteran from World War II, and he asked a question of the panel who was speaking, and he was in tears as he asked that question, and he was upset because he felt that his colleagues, his friends, his brothers died during the war to protect fundamental rights that exist for Europeans now as a result of that war, and they're being forgotten. Their sacrifice is being forgotten. The fact that this isn't something that just happened, this came out of a time of tragedy, a time of loss, a time of sacrifice. We sacrificed a great deal to obtain these rights in the first place. To give them up now for profit is an insult to our history and our heritage and our culture. And as an advocate, I will never forget that first speech and seeing that gentleman stand up and cry in front of an audience because of what he perceived was a loss of dignity by selling out privacy and selling out fundamental rights to corporations. So we have to take back the priorities. We have to accept the fact that we have fundamental rights and they're inalienable rights, and we have to maintain them, we have to enhance them, and we have to embrace them. So please, anybody here who works within the European Parliament, who's going to be involved in the Libby vote in the middle of June, make sure that the MEPs, your superiors, or if you're an MEP yourself, make sure that you remember these issues. Remember the fact that despite what the lobbyists are saying, privacy does not mean the end of the digital economy. Privacy is not bad for Europe. Privacy is not bad for European citizens, and privacy is not bad for the European economy. We have to maintain these fundamental rights. Please take that away with you today.
Thank you very much, Alex. And don't know whether you are aware that today is the 8th of May, and the 8th of May is a very historic day. It was the end of World War II. It was, for many of us, a day of liberation. And I think we should take this historic example also as a kind of destiny for us. Yeah? This is also about democracy, and it's not only about business, but the good message is also that we can combine those two things. Yeah? So it is trust and privacy is not a burden, it is a chance. And it is not a disadvantage, it is an advantage. And I think Ixquick showed that privacy can also be a business model. If we're talking about European perspective and about the growth of the European economy, I think this is also an important piece of information we have from this meeting. Today I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank my two neighbors. It was, I think, the first time we had two speakers who shared the same name, which made it a little bit difficult for chairing a meeting with Alex. Yeah, but so thank you both, Alex, for joining, and sandwiches are provided, and I think we have some more time to solve the problems we just raised and to discuss a little bit. And I'm very happy that when we met first, it was also a political meeting, and I had this 5 minutes where you could explain me, Alex, what was it about, and what was actually the reason then for inviting me for this meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, so they're very nice sandwiches. Yes. Sure.